Kia ora, it's Chris with Earth Sciences New Zealand with the Seasonal Climate Outlook. This is from November to January. The next 3 months, here's what you need to know. Well, finally, the effects of the sudden stratospheric warming event, the SSW. We talked about this last month. That is the rapid warming at the very top of the atmosphere over Antarctica. Well, that had flow-on effects. That was a big reason why we saw the active weather in October. Now, to be fair, about this time last month, we thought things would ease in the second half of October. Well, quite frankly, that did not happen. So things didn't work out as expected. This month, there are more convincing signs that the effects of the SSW will be easing this month. So something to hopefully that will occur, something to look forward, hopefully, especially if you don't like the wind and the active weather. So what's going to happen going full frame is that we're going to see more La Niña-like conditions. La Niña has evolved. La Niña has emerged and is now present in the tropical Pacific. And for much of the country, we're looking at a warm lean. Now, for some, that lean in the warm direction will be more profound than others. However, rainfall is going to be trickier than usual. Look, rainfall themes coming back full screen here or coming back on screen. Rainfall is always the most challenging to predict, whether it's a weather forecast or a climate outlook. Because we're going to be transitioning from here, the sudden stratospheric warming as one of the main climate drivers or influence on our weather, to La Niña, pinpointing that transition is not exactly 100% certain, but we are pretty confident it will happen. It's just the timing of it. So before we go any farther, let's have a look at what to expect. Here's what you need to know. So going full frame. So for the next 3 months, again, these are themes, folks. These are themes as a whole. This is not a coming back on screen, sorry. This is, can't help myself. This is not a 3-day outlook. This is not a 3-week outlook. This is a 3-month outlook. So there will be peaks and valleys. And when it all comes out in the wash, these are the dominating themes that we are expecting now going full frame. So for the northern and eastern part of the North Island, we think about equal chances for temperatures to be average above average. Look, the overnights are more likely to be warmer than usual. That's because of humidity. Once those east and northeast flows kick in with La Niña, western areas of the North Island has the best chance for above average temperatures. Likewise for the South Island, same thing. Northern eastern areas, about equal chances for temperatures to be either average or above average. Western areas, including lower portions of the South Island, from Fiordland to Southland, all the way up the west coast, nearly all the way up on the west coast, well, they have the best chances for seeing straight up above average temperatures. So what does this mean for you watching this? Well, for most of us, we'll probably get a head start on the summer season in terms of what it feels like. And we're going to see that this week. I should mention we are recording this on the 3rd of November, Monday, November 3rd. It is going to be a warm week. You'll see, we'll talk more about this in a minute. So what we're experiencing this week, and that is unusual warmth, that is likely to be a reoccurring theme for the next 3 months. It doesn't mean every single week will be warmer than average. Look, I could tell you that your marriage is going to be good for the next 3 months. It doesn't mean you won't get into an argument for a few days with your spouse, right? I could tell you if you run a business for the next 3 months that, look, for the next 3 months, you're going to have, say, above average profits. It doesn't mean you won't have a down weekend or a down week, right? So again, we're talking themes, big picture here. But it does likely mean that more days outside, you may be running the fan more often at night. If you have the air con, you may be blasting the air conditioning more frequently than usual, especially as we get past November into December. Heck, you may want to run it in November, depending on how things go. You may want to go to the beach a bit earlier than usual. Ocean temperatures may warm up a bit earlier than usual. The growing season probably kicking in pretty good as long as we get enough rain. Speaking of rain, what's the rainfall outlook? Here we go, and I'll disappear. So going full frame here. If there's going to be a wetter than usual 3-month period, so again, this is a 3-month outlook, we think it's the upper North Island. So where you see this kind of tealish aqua color, this is where we're giving about equal chances for rainfall to be normal or above normal. Now, for the rest of the North Island, near normal rainfall is likely. Now, for the South Island, top of the South Island, eastern South Island, about near normal. Now, if there's going to be drier than usual conditions, it looks like areas in the west of the South Island in this sort of gold color, that is where the best chances are for rainfall to be normal or below normal, about equal chances. Coming back on screen here, there's a bit to unpack here. Do you remember at the very beginning, let's go back to it. hold on here. Here we go. Sorry about that. At the very beginning, and I'll disappear, we talked about rainfall outlook trickier than usual. More uncertainty. Well, if you get a chance, when you look at the document, and I encourage you to go to Earth Sciences New Zealand, or you can still type in NIWA, and go to the Seasonal Climate Outlook, you're going to see that we give 3 outcomes, right? There's 3 chances. The rainfall or temperature could be near normal, or it could be below normal, or it could be above normal, right? So there's 3 outcomes to consider. And when you look at those outcomes, particularly for rainfall, for many of these 6 regions on screen, not all, but for many, the odds are more like 30, 40, 30. We call that flat, meaning there's just not a lot of confidence in which of those outcomes may eventuate, and for a range of reasons. Largely because when do we transition from the influence or the impacts of the sudden stratospheric warming to something more quintessential and reminiscent of La Niña? There is uncertainty there, and because of the uncertainty, that is reflected in the outlook. I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I would expect when we issue a summer outlook this time next month, very late November, very early December, that we may sharpen things up because hopefully by then the effects of the SSW, they're in the rearview mirror. We're not worried about when the transition is going to happen. It's already happened. And by then we'll be able to say, right, some places have a better chance for wetter conditions. Some places have a better chance for drier conditions. And we can be a bit more confident on where that is. In the meantime, this is how we see things shaping up for the next 3 months. The key thing is there is uncertainty. Also, what's very important to remember, because La Niña is here, that tends to load the dice for big rainfall events or increase the odds for big rainfall events, particularly, but not exclusively, for the northern part of the North Island. We often have to watch the eastern part of the North Island. Now, dryness during La Niña, history tells us that it's the western part of the South Island and lower part of the South Island that has the greatest odds for dryness. That, too, could happen for the western North Island. Something to keep in mind. That's an update we may lean in or go in that direction with future updates if that becomes a bit more apparent. And by the way, as I disappear and go full screen, you can see, again, look at our confidence here. Low to medium. So, unfortunately, it's not great. Wish we could be stronger and better with our confidence, but look, that is the reality of our situation. So that's the next 3 months. So, by the way, again, watch out for the potential for big rain events as we see our weather have is more likely to be connected with the subtropics and tropics for the upper North Island. And that's why we have to watch out for those big rainfall events. Right. Okay, what can we expect in the weather space? So that's the next 3 months. Let's talk the next 3 to 7 days. So as I say, recording this on the 3rd of November, what can we expect? Well, this is our surface pressure anomaly. So where you see the red, that's unusually high pressure, good weather, settled weather. And where you see the blue, that's unusually low pressure, typically unsettled weather, stormy weather, active weather, weather that basically brings cloud and precipitation. So we're going to start off November on a pretty dry note. We had a great weekend. Again, as I record this on a Monday, past couple of days were mint, right? We're going to continue with that theme through at least, looks like Thursday, maybe even Friday. So as I bring this forward, you can see how by later in the week, kind of like the 6th and the 7th, we see low pressure, blue, to our north. That's likely to bring an increased threat for rain for the upper North Island. In fact, real quick, let's show you what the forecast expectation is by, say, well, first of all, by Thursday morning, very little. So what you're looking at here, super quick, I'll disappear, is you're looking at rainfall scenarios. On the left is a dry outcome, 10th percentile, if you're familiar or comfortable with percentiles and how they work. On the right-hand side is the wet scenario, or 90th percentile. In the middle is, well, the middle of the road scenario, or the 50th percentile. And you can see not a lot of rain is forecast. Even that wet scenario by Thursday, there's very little rain. But you can see by Friday and Saturday, with that low to our north forecast, we do see a threat of rain. And even that dry scenario has a little bit of rain, albeit not much. Look, it'd be pretty darn unlikely to get that much rain on the wet scenario by 7 o'clock Friday evening. Let's come on screen once again. You can see if the wet scenario were to eventuate, we see pockets of that pink and or even maybe some purple. That's 50 millimeters or more on this particular color scale. But middle of the road scenario, Northland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, it's more like 5 to 15 millimeters. And if the dry scenario eventuated, boy, there'd be very little or no rainfall stop. This is by late in the afternoon, early in the evening on Friday, the 7th of November. And playing that through, not much thereafter. So basically, it's a dry week until, say, Thursday night. Right. So let's go back to the pressure gradient and show you what to expect going back to how things are going to unfold. So as we move past the 7th of November, you can see low pressures forecast to emerge over the Tasman Sea. Just zooming out a little bit here. We still have this pesky low to our north, so that's why the end of the week, kind of Thursday night, Friday, maybe into Saturday, the threat of rain we have to watch. And because we have low pressure to our north, that could be some moist flows coming from the subtropics. So, again, that wet scenario, it is unlikely, but we can't completely discount it. Just putting that out there. And as we move forward through time, you can see how blue or low pressure is favored to be around into our north and west. This weather pattern, by the way, the 12th of November, this favors northerly quarter flow. So what do you mean by northerly quarter, Chris? So that's either northeast or northwest. The word north is involved. High pressure to our south and east, low pressure to our north and west. This is a very warm flow of air. If you don't believe me, have a look at this. So as you know, if you've been watching this before, oftentimes we like to look at temperature, not so much at the ground, but say 1,500 meters-ish above the ground, about a mile up. It gives us a really good idea of what the temperature theme will be. So you can see here as we back up from the 4th and the 5th, a lot of red. I'm just going to play this through. Look how deep that red is. So the darker the red, in this case, the more unusually warm the air mass is forecast to be. And we do see some blue. That is unusually cold air. But that's over the Aussie Bight, South Australia, Tasmania, parts of Victoria, not in our neck of the woods. So we are going to be unusually warm. In fact, I could see temperatures approaching, probably exceeding 30 Celsius multiple times over the next 5 days. So that's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I'm not saying every single day. I'm saying out of those 5 days, I could see 2 or 3 of them at least where temperatures flirt or exceed 30 degrees, particularly Hawke's Bay, particularly maybe the eastern part of the southbound like Canterbury. So it'll be very warm, borderline hot this week. And you can see the airflow quite nicely. Low pressure and low pressure to our kind of west and north, high pressure, there it is, going back here to our east and south, and that will facilitate that warmth, but also facilitate that chance for rain. So dry for the first few days, and then as we get to the end of week 1 of November, Thursday and Friday, those chances for rain increase for the North Island. Let's talk about the South Island for short-term rainfall. So you can see, again, we have the, I'll disappear here. We have the dry scenario on the left, wet scenario on the right, middle of the road scenario, well, in the middle. And you can see this week, by the late evening hours on Friday, even that wet scenario, I mean, that's not a lot of rain. On this color scale, that pink, that's 100 millimeters. And again, that's the wet scenario. Middle of the road scenario, maybe 50 to 75 millimeters of rainfall, and maybe 25, 35 millimeters or less with the dry scenario. But that's not happening until after Wednesday. And notice the eastern part of the South Island from Otago, Southland, Canterbury, Marlborough, very little to no rain, even that wet scenario. So it's going to be dry this week for eastern portions of the South Island. That does not bode well for the for rainfall and or for dryness, I should say, for the eastern part of both islands. Here's why. If we go to the New Zealand Drought Index, which is right here, you can see we do have, coming back on screen, you can see we have unusual dryness shaping up for Hawke's Bay. So for central and southern Hawke's Bay, we can see dry to very dry conditions. This is the New Zealand Drought Index. So the prospect for rain, as we look for the next 5 days, doesn't look good. I mean, even if that wet scenario, even if that happened, which is unlikely, it's not really going to change things around. It's more likely than not, very little rain happens, middle and left-hand scenario. So those drying conditions are going to get worse. The dry conditions in Hawke's Bay are not going to improve in the short term. That is the message. That's what it looks like. Right. Let's go back to here. You can see, coming back on screen, we do have dry conditions in Hawke's Bay. Nothing really emerging for the South Island quite yet, which is good news. It's been very wet for the western South Island, but I know dryness is starting to emerge over eastern parts of the South Island. So let's talk about, just put in a bow on this before we get nerdy and go into the nerd alert. Oh, right. Actually, yeah. Here's what to expect. Sorry, my mind is drifting here in a few different locations. So just to recap, temperatures for the next 3 months going full frame, having a warm lean with the strongest lean, if you will, in the warm direction for western areas of both islands. And in terms of rainfall, it looks like if there's going to be wetter than usual conditions over the next 3 months as a whole, it's the upper North Island, I beg your pardon, where normal or above normal, about equal chances for both, is the outlook forecast. And for the western South Island, this is where normal or below normal rainfall is forecast for the next 3 months. What about the next 5 weeks? So that's the next 3 months as a whole. What about the next 5 weeks? Well, let's go to our NIWA 35, because what we're going to look at here is the expectation coming back on screen of what can we expect kind of, over the next month, basically November. And we talked about how dry it's going to be for much of the country for the first 4 or 5 days, right? Well, there you can see it, brown. So what you're looking at here are rainfall themes over a 7-day period. So is it going to be wetter than usual, drier than usual, or maybe about where it should be? That's what we're describing here. Week 2. So this is the 8th through the 15th. So this is basically week 2 of November. And notice the threat of rain or unusually wet conditions growing for around the edges of the North Island, from Tadawfa to Gisborne, Coromandel, maybe Bay of Plenty, perhaps parts of the eastern and northern part of the upper North Island, particularly Northland. Notice how much of the South Island, central and southern South Island generally, has a wet lean. So wetter than usual conditions in that second week. So that's not this week. That's next week, okay? So next week. What about week 3? Ah, look at that. A change in rainfall pattern means a change in airflow. Airflow and rainfall patterns, they're joined at the hip. So you can plainly see the upper North Island, the eastern North Island, even the eastern South Island. These are the areas where wetter than usual conditions are favored. Areas in tan or even the darker brown, that's where drier than usual conditions are favored just for this particular week. And this is the smack dab middle of November, the 15th, if I got my math right, to the 22nd of November. So right in the middle of November, 15th to 22nd. Right, week 4, 22nd to the 29th of November. Notice dryness is forecast to return for much of the upper North Island, much of the eastern and lower South Island. We'll see if that wetness happens across northern portions of the South Island. Look, 4 weeks out, this is a decent model that we have at Earth Sciences New Zealand, but it is 4 weeks out and these things do change, but this is what the indication is as of now, the 3rd of November. And then as we go to week 5, which is the last couple days of November, into December, can you stand it? A decidedly drier theme or lean for much of the country. We see a lot of tan on the map. Yeah, a few areas of maybe dark green, but the idea is that a return to drier conditions could be high pressure, certainly airflows that aren't congruent with heavy rainfall. So that's the next 5 weeks. So in summary, we know it's dry the first week, recording this 3rd of November, dry for the next 4 or 5 days, 4 days anyway. We're watching week 2, the 8th through the 15th, and especially the 15th to the 22nd. If there's going to be heavy rain for the upper North Island, eastern North Island, this is the time to watch. In fact, the threat for heavy rain for the next 3 months probably going to be elevated for eastern and northern parts of the country. It doesn't mean that it'll happen all the time. It just means, look, when you play the odds game, odds are, well, we'll have higher odds for these big rainfall events, and here's why. Let's go to our climate drivers. So we talked about La Niña. La Niña has emerged in the tropical Pacific. Well, how do we know that? Well, first of all, we look at ocean temperatures, and that really does help a lot. As you can see, as I bring this forward, 1st of November, you can see this classic kind of, let's use a bigger one. There we go. You can see this classic kind of horseshoe shape, right? This is La Niña. You see these blue colors? This is negative ocean temperature anomaly, so colder than usual. And out toward the Coral Sea and the Central Pacific, and Western Pacific, what we call the maritime continent, especially out here where the red and orange is, that is warmer than usual. You see, what happens is that the trade winds, which are winds coming from this direction, in this direction, they meet and we get an easterly wind, right? This is normal. But with La Niña, this happens, it's kind of on steroids. The winds blow a lot faster and a lot harder. So as a consequence, we get this cooler than average, pattern of ocean temperatures over the central and eastern tropical Pacific. You'll also note that warmer than usual ocean temperatures are present over the Coral Sea. That's something we're going to have to watch as we work through tropical cyclone season, by the way. Look, whenever we have, I'm going to jump around on you. Whenever we have something like this, now I know this is the 12th of November, but I want to use this as an example of a weather pattern that could repeat itself and present itself multiple times during the next 3 months. In fact, if you believe the long-range guidance, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months from now, the guidance says low pressure is going to be favored to our north and west. High pressure is going to be favored to our east and south. This is what the guidance tells us. And if that's the case, guess what? That means more northeasterly type winds. And guess what? Or more northerly quarters. So northeast, northwest, maybe east at times. It really depends how these systems actually set up in reality. And if we look at them, have a look. So that's the pressure setup, right? Well, look at this. If we have warmer than usual ocean temperatures up in this area, and we're tapping down moisture from this direction, we're going to be tapping into that source of potentially high moisture content. So this area, as you can see, is warmer than average with our ocean temperatures. And if our weather comes from this area, anytime we get a low dropping down from the north, anytime we have airflows coming from the northwest, or we have airflows coming from the northeast or the northwest, anytime that happens, that does increase the odds for obviously warmer temperatures, but also big rain events because the oceans are warmer here, which gives more water vapor into the atmosphere, and more water vapor, water vapor is fuel for rainfall. So this is why we kind of have to be on guard for potentially big rain events as we work away for the next 3 months, with the North Island particularly, but not exclusively, the upper North Island most prone to those. Now, if we go subsurface or underneath the surface, you can see here what this shows. Look at this. So this right here, that's roughly the international date line. So right in this area, I'm doing a very poor sort of line, but you get the idea. Oh, there we go, right there. That is the international date line right in here. You can see the cold water at depth and beneath the surface. So what we're looking at is a cross section. So as you can see here, here's depth. This is the surface, down to 450 meters. And out in this area is roughly, I'll disappear here, or that one. So out in this area is, get rid of that. There we go. Sorry. So this is out toward the eastern and central Pacific. You can see not only is it colder than usual at the surface, but well below the surface, 50, 100, 150 meters down below. So this is probably going to be pretty much here for the next few months, La Niña. Maybe of moderate strength, too. Now, farther west, again, the international date line, right about so, we see much warmer than usual conditions, not only at the surface, but also at depth. So this right here, we have a dipole, much cooler to the east, warmer than usual to the west, and that's what creates La Niña. And the reason that is important is because that drives atmospheric patterns. In fact, if you have a look, our friend velocity potential. So where you see the cool colors or the greenish, bluish, aqua colors, that is where lift is forecast. Where you see some of the warmer colors, that is where sink. We're at pretty high in the atmosphere. And as you work away into November and December, you can see this is an area worth watching, November and especially December. This could be a source for heavy rainfall events. We'll have to watch and see. This is not, this is something we can't see. We can't say for sure is going to happen. But look, this is the evidence. It's right there. This is showing enhanced rising motion over the maritime continent, potentially toward the Coral Sea. And as you move through into January, February, and March, you can see sinking becomes a bit more pronounced near the international date line and the equator, where the two kind of intersect, kind of near Fiji, right? And to the north. So if that is true, we may see perhaps in January and in February our chances for rain decreasing, at least for weather systems that have tropical or subtropical origin. That may decrease as we work into Jan and Feb, whereas in December, you can see how that's not there. You can see that, right? That's enhanced rising motion over the what we call the maritime continent, Indonesia, and potentially into the Coral Sea. So that is something that bears watching. It does persist into January a bit too. You can see that, but at the same time, we start to see that rise start to filter in and start to flex, quite frankly, over the tropical Pacific. And there it is in Feb. That really starts to kind of flex its muscles, doesn't it, in February? It may kind of shunt any tropical development and keep it away from this part of the country, this part of the tropics, I should say. And then that starts to weaken in March. So the message is that we'll have to watch the tropics for a source or as a source for heavy rain-bearing events as we work away through November and especially December, perhaps into January, largely because of La Niña. And it's no coincidence. You see how there is largely some sink here. You see these warmer colors, that's sinking motion. And you can see how that kind of persists into December. Well, it's no coincidence that's where cool ocean temperatures are. You see that? And over this region, over Indonesia, again, the maritime continent, Coral Sea, you can see, there we go, 1st of November. You see this? Cooler than usual. And over, portions of the Coral Sea, let's clean that up. In this region right here, that's not good. We'll do a better one than that. In this region right here, you can see how that's warmer than usual. Look, it's not a coincidence that we are seeing this right here. October, November, and December especially. That's not a coincidence. That is enhanced lift. Thunderstorms, rising motion, it typically follows where most unusually warm water is. Sinking motion, settled weather, lack of rainfall, that usually follows where cooler than usual ocean temperatures are. You can see that nicely. So in summary, for the next 3 months, there it is, warmer than average lean for much of the country with the western area of both islands. You may be wondering why western areas. Well, coming back on screen, we are expecting airflows to favor the east and northeast, particularly as we get past early November and into, say, the middle part of November and beyond. And that's a reverse firn. So that's why those areas are favored. You have to watch out for some humid nights coming up, particularly in December and January. For the North Island, with those airflows coming from the subtropics and tropics, could be pretty sticky and gooey at times, pretty unpleasant for sleeping. And in terms of rainfall, if there's going to be wetter than usual conditions, top of the country, upper North Island. If there's going to be drier than usual conditions, lower South Island. Keep in mind, we're given equal chances for normal or above normal for the upper North Island and about equal chances for normal or below normal. And once again, I got to say this, oopsie, going back on screen. Notice our confidence bar. It's low to moderate, not very high. Look, that's it for me. If you want a complete read of the Seasonal Climate Outlook, head to Earth Sciences New Zealand, or you can still type in NIWA. Just type in Seasonal Climate Outlook, and that'll get you in the right direction. Thanks for watching. I'm Earth Sciences meteorologist Chris Brandolino. We'll see you next time. Ngā mihi nui.